around the nation, CYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Wednesday. We got a good show for you guys today. A lot of interesting stuff here. We have deregulation in the pork industry. So be careful when you reach for that bacon, because you don't know anymore. We'll talk about that. Disaster. Then we also are going to talk about Donald Trump in some of those swing states, very important states in the Midwest. How is he doing there? And if there is reason for Trump supporters to freak out. Should be an interesting story. Then we've got Midwest manufacturing. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we have the most absurd medical bills ever received. It's an interesting story. And then we're going to talk about a clothing line that people are outraged about. So we got outrage in the show today. So fun times. All right. So like I said, a lot of stuff to go to today. Please like and share the stream if you haven't already. That helps us out greatly. Gets us out to more people. Also, let me thank some patrons before we get into the stories as well. So I want to thank Chris Dickey, Conroy Campbell, Daniel Luna, Daniel S., Darius Miles, and Daryl Takara. So thank you to all those patrons, patreon.com/TYDNation. That's how you can support the show if you'd like to. You can do, $1, whatever, $2, $3. Like, it's less than a cup of coffee at McDonald's or whatever fast food place or wherever you get your coffee. Much, much cheaper than the local coffee shops, that's for sure. So, if you want to help out the show and, just help us continue to grow, get bigger, maybe hire staff, etc., or co-host, that'd be great. So do that, sign up, patreon.com/TYTNation. Once we get to a certain threshold, we'll actually be able to do stuff. Right now, it's just enough to keep us on the air, which is good. But, got to keep growing. Another way to support the show is through our membership program on YouTube. You get like an emoji that shows that you're a member, and you get priority on your comments. So that's super cool. Okay, so that's it for that. Let's dive in into the stories. All right. Now, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are three states that helped put Donald Trump in the White House in 2016. This time, however, Republicans are thinking that it might not be that easy. So now that's interesting because, look, you know how Hillary Clinton lost these incredibly crucial states after, for one, failing to campaign there. I mean, campaign workers in Michigan literally begged her and her campaign to send more resources and staff to be able to campaign in that state. But she had no interest in campaigning there, no interest in the Midwest. I don't know why she made that decision. One of the biggest, I think, political blunders of her career, losing to Donald Trump. I mean, that in itself, embarrassing. Now, I'm not trying to rehash 2016. I'm just letting you know that decision lost her the Electoral College. Donald Trump was able to win because, unfortunately, here in America, we're not a democracy. We don't have direct, elections. It goes to the Electoral College, which has decided, without the popular vote, quite a few presidencies, including George W. Bush and now Donald Trump. So, that's a disaster. Maybe Democrats should actually think about doing something about the Electoral College. It is, after all, a relic of slavery. But anyway, now Wisconsin Republicans are now concerned that there might not be a repeat in their state. Now, this is Brandon Schultz, former executive director of the Wisconsin Republican Party. And he's talking to Politico, and he told him this, quote, "For the president to win Wisconsin again, he's not going to have the free ride he had last time. is Republican, right? He's not going to have Hillary Clinton sitting on her hands. He's going to have a completely engaged opposition party on the ground. So that's important, right? So now, the article mentions that Milwaukee and Madison are reliably Democratic. So no matter what, the votes are going to go to the Democrat, no matter who it is. Okay. However, where Trump really did well, at least when it comes to Wisconsin, uh, was in the more conservative WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. Now, those are the counties that surround those big population centers, and it's where Republicans generally do better. Now, Donald Trump didn't really do impressively well, but did well enough to win those counties. So that's important context, right? So now, Charles Franklin, who's a Marquette Law School pollster, said this quote: "It isn't that the Republican Party is withering away in the WOW counties. It was that they weren't particularly thrilled with Trump, and they showed it by not voting for him." Again, he didn't get a gigantic majority. In fact, he actually did worse than Mitt Romney had previously. And of course, Mitt Romney was the loser in 2012. So now, he also says that Trump still struggles to get more than 40% approval, even in the WOW counties. It really is an open question about whether Republicans have come back to him here. My guess would be probably not. It's gotten much, much worse for Trump. He's actually deeply unpopular. Now, more. According to Politico, Trump's performance in those counties in 2016 had fallen behind Mitt Romney, and Republican voters are still worried about the president's character and temperament. Well, with good reason. Now, Aaron Perry, a Waukesha alderman, who changed his party affiliation from Republican to Democrat, so he left the party because of Donald Trump, he said this, quote, "There comes a point where everybody has their own threshold of how much they can take. We're getting to the point now where there's no way he's gaining supporters. The only way for Trump to go is down. And there's not much down to go." Okay. And look, we see that in the polls. Let's go to Michigan, right? Now, this is according to Real Clear Politics. So they've taken a lot of averages, right? In Michigan, every Democrat beats Donald Trump. For example, Joe Biden, an average about 10 to 12 points. Bernie Sanders, around 7 to 10 points. Elizabeth Warren, I think about 4 points. Kamala Harris, even Klobuchar beats Donald Trump in an average of polling by about 6 points. Disaster. Now, there are only 2 polls out in Wisconsin. One was back in August, and the other was back in March. And both of them had Biden, because that's the only person they decided to poll against Trump, which is, I think, is strange. But and so, yes, this might be a little bit of an outlier, and it doesn't really matter as much because there's not as much polling behind it. But still, the 2 polls that they took in Wisconsin had Trump behind by 9 points in a general election matchup. So again, disaster. No wonder Republicans are starting to get in panic mode in some of these states. Now, this has led to the Republican strategy to basically scaremonger about the Democrats. This is fun. Now, this is according to GOP strategist. Let's see. I didn't get his name here, actually, which is strange. His last name was Fauci. He's a former never Trumper, now backs the president. He said this, quote, "They don't like the Twitter, regarding, of course, Trump supporters. They're nervous about the tariffs, but they're scared witless about Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or Pete Buttigieg." Oh my God. They're so scary, right? Well, maybe Mayo P is a little bit scary. I literally had a podium that said disaster on it. But anyway, when it comes to Bernie Sanders, for example, oh my God, he's gonna take away my health insurance and actually give me health care that's actually better than what I have right now. That covers more, no co-pays, deductibles, or anything like that, and lower premiums, or no premiums, just slightly higher tax rates. But it balances out to where you actually pay less. Oh my God, horrible, terrible. No, how am I going to get denied by my health care now? I love my private insurance. Says no one. Look, here's the thing. The Republican priorities, right? They're, I wouldn't say priorities. Their priorities are obviously for the rich, right? Their playbook is lying about progressive proposals and policy. Now, what's interesting is even though they lie about progressive policy, they also kind of run on their own type. Uh, Look, for example, Donald Trump ran on universal health care in 2016. He says, oh, no, I'm going to get everybody health care. It's going to be tremendous. Nobody's going to die in the streets. He also ran on protecting Medicare and Social Security. His last few budget proposals cut both Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So, that obvious lie, right? And look, he's long advocated for universal health care. In fact, in the 2000 book, The America We Deserve, he wrote, we must have universal health care. We should not hear so many stories of families ruined by healthcare expenses. And you want stories? I've got a segment that I'm doing about people's stories. Let's just say that they're absolutely heartbreaking. Um, Now, you even talked about how Canada's publicly funded healthcare system is a model worth emulating. Also, he talked about how much better Australia's healthcare system is than America, that's a single payer system. Oops. He also wrote, ran against the Iraq War. Said that was a stupid conflict, that we should not be involved in that conflict. Also, he said we're going to go after the global financial elite. Now, it turns out that happens to be more anti Semitic than anything. But at the time, you could say, look, Wall Street crashed the economy. They've been taking insane risks with depositor money and with the economy in order to get lots of short term profit. So I guess if you hear that and you're not anti Semitic, which again, that's one of those anti Semitic tropes. But if you're not, and if you don't think that way, you think, oh, great, they're taking on the Wall Street greed. Well, that's great because I hate Wall Street greed. They crash the economy, and right now they're corrupt. So wonderful. He also ran on things like let's clean up the swamp or let's drain the swamp. He only drained the swamp into his pockets, or as Kyle Kalinske said, right into his mouth. Gross. But so Republicans, and he's not the only one to run on this stuff. Dave Brat, who defeated Eric Cantor, ran against the banks. You also have Mitch McConnell, again, in his local race in Kentucky, running against, running in favor, I should say, of Connect, which is Kentucky's version of Obamacare, and also running against corruption, which is hilarious. And so, and protecting Medicare and Social Security. So Republicans run on progressive policy. They just don't know it. Well, the voters don't know it, but they know it. The people that are running, they know it, and they actively lie to people in their campaigns. So anyway, they don't mean any of it. That's the point. But those positions, they are popular. They are progressive. Now, if Democrats run a corporate establishment candidate like Buttigieg or Biden, well, then Trump is lucky because he gets to run another campaign against the establishment. And that's what gained him popularity in the first place. Although, look, it's going to be a lot more difficult for him to do that since he's shown himself to be a complete liar, but only if you've been paying attention. And if you haven't been paying attention the last few years, then, well, there's a chance that people could fall for that again. But still, this strategy of demonizing popular policies, I think is going to backfire. And I think Trump is going to have nothing to run on. And that's why they're freaking out. Now, I'm not saying the victory, of course, is guaranteed against Trump. I don't want people to get complacent or anything. There's a lot that can go wrong. But at the same time, there's good reason for these Republicans to be incredibly worried about this enthusiasm gap for Donald Trump in these very important states. Okay. Moving on here. Now, conservatives all over the Midwest are increasingly becoming aware that the president has been unable to keep his promise of keeping factory jobs inside the United States. Now, workers across the country in this sector have been losing their jobs as these companies continue to fold up and open up shops and ship jobs overseas. Now, Peru, which is a small town in Indiana, is actually getting ready for the loss of the Schneider Electric Production Facility. Now, it's a very large employer. It's the largest employer in this very, very small town of about 11,000 people that has operated since the early 1900s. Now, in February, the French multi billion dollar company announced its plans to close in the city, with the final waves of layoffs planned throughout the next few months. So that's a disaster. Back in 2017 and 2018, the company had reduced the plant's workforce by about 25%. The remaining 306 workers, who mostly produce electrical panel boards, were expected to largely to be left unemployed, as production may be sent to either Monterrey, Mexico, or other U.S. facilities. So here you have another small town, another factory that's closing, and hundreds of people in this case in small town America losing their jobs. Now that's going to be, of course, devastating for the local economy. So now juxtapose this, and this scene is happening all over the country in many of the Midwest's small towns and townships. Uh, Juxtapose this with Trump's bragging that the economy is tremendous and very, 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 very strong, right? When you compare the two things, well, I mean, really kind of looks like somebody isn't telling the truth. Like somebody's kind of lying about this. No, what do you believe? Trump, who lies all the time, or your lying eyes? If you're in one of these towns, I think the answer is obvious. Again, happening all over the country, people who voted for Trump in the heartland on the promise that he would save their jobs are still losing their jobs. Now, that is despite these corporations having incredibly hefty profits. So now, in Miami County, by the way, Peru, where Peru is located, and again, this is Indiana, Miami, I know, right? Trump won over 70% of the vote in 2016. What's going to happen now that these facilities are closing down? What's going to happen now that Wall Street's been paid, that 83% of Trump's $1.9 trillion in tax cuts went to the top 1%? What are people going to do now? And not only that, but these companies, by the way, they didn't just get giant tax cuts. They also got lucrative federal contracts. Now, none of those things, none of those incentives saved these people's jobs, but it did put a lot of money in the pockets of the CEOs and the executives and the board. And it also made a fool out of a lot of Trump supporters. And now, of course, they're pissed. They're not happy. Let me go to a few of those. Troy Mallet, for example. Now, Troy Mallet worked at the plant in Peru, Indiana for about 15 years. He said this, quote, Trump has really disappointed the state of Indiana and the city of Peru. He needs to come down here and see what's going on. And odds are he will probably not. Or if he does, campaign stop. And then he'll say something stupid. But he said, quote, it's going to kill the community, that plant closing. They're just ruining so many lives here, so many lives. I thought I had a future here. it's just wrong to do this to a community just to save a buck. But that's not what you do to people. Well, that's what Trump does. See, you guys have to understand. Trump is not one of you. He's not one of us. He's not one of the workers. The guy's never worked a day in his life on the factory floor. He's one of the bosses. He's one of the idiot guys who own the place. And, or I should say, maybe his father is more like the guy who owns the place. And then Trump is just the idiot son that they brought in to do one of the jobs that really aren't that important, but he thinks he's the boss. Yeah, Trump's that guy. You all know that guy if you've worked in a factory. Like, he's, again, the guy that makes $1 while you make 10 cents. Why would you ever want to trust one of those guys? You know what his tagline was before MAGA? You're fired. You're going to trust that guy. You trust that guy. Now, here's the other thing, right? So now, look, this plant was unionized. Republicans despise unions. Donald Trump despises unions. All the bosses despise the unions, right? And so now that might be a factor. The union, though, really did try to get this plant to stay. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers Union said it offered various concessions in hopes of keeping the facility open, including cuts to wages, benefits, and tax cuts from the union and local municipalities to no avail. Now, look, the other thing that's in the news today is the GM strike. What just happened in the GM strike is you had the company that said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to pull all of your health care. You now have no health insurance. That's what the companies do. The negotiations fell apart because some of the stuff that the union was looking for in concessions from the actual company is obviously higher pay, higher benefits, an elimination of the reliance on temporary workers, allowing people to get to top pay faster. Right now, it takes about 8 years for someone who hires in to actually make the maximum wage. It's about $30 an hour. That doesn't include benefits, of course. And so, look, they were asking for your normal stuff, right? The company says, absolutely not. We can't do it. We can't afford it. Oh, wait, they just gave their CEO a $20 million bonus. Oops. Yes, they can afford it, but they choose not to. So that's the other thing that's happening right here. And so you can see that these companies basically will threaten to leave. They'll threaten to do whatever. They'll take away your health care, your health insurance. Also, they can save an extra buck. And that's what happens in this, right? And so the fact that they worked so hard to get this company to stay, the union did, and they didn't, angered workers to no end. In fact, workers like Dana Eckelbarger, who worked at the plant for about 12 years, said he was set to be laid off at the end of the month. Now, on this, he said, quote, if you get federal aid from the government, which again, pointing to GM there, the work needs to stay in the U.S. They've made record profits so far this year, and they're still sending work across the border to Mexico. It's cheap labor. They don't want to pay the wages that they're making. Now, this is in relation to Schneider Electric, to be fair. Eckelberger also added that Schneider Electric could receive millions of dollars in federal contracts, tax cut savings, stimulus funding, but was still offshoring U.S. jobs. In fact, Schneider Electric and its affiliates have started more than $9 million in new federal contracts since announcing the Peru plant, Indiana plant closure. That closure has been criticized as a union-busting measure, as the Schneider plant in Peru was one of the 2 U.S. plants to strike in 2014 amid new union contract negotiations. So, again, they despise unions because there's nothing scarier to a boss and a boardroom than the workers coming together to collectively bargain for wages. That's why they lobby the government to try to crush unions, to try to prevent people from joining unions in the first place, and to make it easier for plants to crush down on unions. So if you want to fight the power, join a union. But anyway, now, Eckelbarger continued by saying, quote, "This has been a money-making company for 100 years, and it's just proving that unions are not the cause of companies going out of business. No, they make plenty of money, plenty of profit. They just don't want to share it with the workers." He said, "This is the livelihood here in Peru. There are a lot of things tied into the plant closure that's going to hurt big time. It's going to hurt the schools, the police, the department, the fire department. It's going to hurt everybody in the long run, except, of course, for the people who own the plant, who are going to get tons of money in executive bonuses." And that's unfortunately how this game's played. It's all about the greed, and it's always been. Now, I've got more. Chuck Dennison of Youngstown, Ohio, um, who worked at the recently shut down Lordstown plant for about 20 years before he was forced to take early retirement. He talked about the effects of the closing that it's had in their town. Quote, "We lost our Kmart, we lost Toys R Us, the hospital got shut down, and last month was the final print of the local newspaper." To be fair, Toys R Us kind of went out of business anyway. Poor business practices. Oh, and those darn millennials not having enough kids. They blamed it on that too. Instead of actually reinvesting in their stores, Sears was having the same issue, not reinvesting in their stores, and instead blaming others for the problem, taking out junky loans. We've talked about that before. Now, he also continued, he said, "Bars and gas stations have closed down. More houses are going up for sale." And of course, who's going to buy those houses? Who's going to move to that place now that the major employer is gone? So not only that, but one of their grocery stores, Shoppers Values Foods, also ended up closing because people can't afford it. Now to probably be replaced by like a Dollar General or something, or a chain of Dollar Generals. As far as the eye can see, Dollar General. That's what happens in these small towns. I know because I've lived it. I've seen this firsthand. And so it's an absolute disaster. Now, these towns, again, they're becoming ghost towns. And this is happening all over the Midwest, and it's all because of corporate greed. Now, good thing is, you've got people waking up, and you've got people fighting back. Now, Dennison joined with a man named Frank Staples. Now, Frank Staples was a carrier plant employee in Indianapolis for about 14 years. Now, he had to go on medical leave. And what they're doing, though, while they're on that leave, is they're organizing workers with the Bernie-affiliated group Our Revolution in order to protest other plant closures and layoffs in the Midwest, including the Schneider plant. Staples said, quote, "I've seen businesses in my hometown close because Carrier fired so many people." Carrier, if you don't remember, again, was that air conditioning plant that ended up getting a ton of special breaks and incentives from the former governor and now Vice President Mike Pence. So Pence's administration gave all these giveaways and goodies and handouts, and the Trump administration also did as well, in order to get Carrier to stay. And still, they ended up closing down plants and offshoring jobs. Because it's not about that. It's not about it's not about the necessarily the financial health of these companies. They're not like going out of business because labor costs too much or anything like that. No, they're leaving because they want to save a buck. They're leaving so they can go to places like China and Vietnam, and open up plants in places basically where they can pay labor dirt cheap. And they're hurting communities. They're destroying communities, and they're hurting the economy. And at the end of the day, they're also going to hurt themselves because nobody's going to be able to afford their products if all these jobs are gone. So now, Staples argued that if Schneider Electric followed through with closing the plant, the city's loss in payroll taxes and cascade effect on small businesses would completely ruin the town. Quote, "They're not going to have a Peru anymore. You're going to have a community ripped apart in the Midwest due to corporate greed." And this is what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren is talking about. So now both of them are talking about corporate greed. I think Bernie Sanders has the most robust plans in order to take on corporate greed and to take on Wall Street and the CEOs. But Elizabeth Warren also has some decent plans as well. And that's being, I think, fairly objective. Okay. But this is what happens when we have a system that is rigged against the average person and in favor of the rich. And by the way, this is why we need a total transformation of that system, and why I don't think Elizabeth Warren's plans are quite enough or quite what we need at this time. Everything they claim, by the way, the Republicans claim that democratic socialism or socialism would do: drive out businesses, destroy towns, rip apart families, leave people without work and hope. All that's happening under a Republican administration and right wing economic policies. What we need is a complete revitalization of labor rights in this country, as well as a president who is willing to stand up against these corporations and their greed. Because, look, if we don't, this is going to continue, and the middle class is eventually going to be destroyed completely. And then we're just going to have a country full of haves and have nothings. And that is not a direction that we need to go. Okay. Let's move on. Speaking of bad Republican policies, now, the Trump administration has just finalized a rule that will allow pork producers to essentially regulate themselves. Now, according to the new rules finalized Tuesday by the Department of Agriculture, those rules basically reduce the number of inspectors required at pork plants and would also remove a cap on the speed inspection lines can run. So, okay, so now you have less inspectors, less USDA inspections, and a faster line speed, because that'll turn out great. Now, not only that, but the inspections will also be able to be done by people who are not trained. These local plant employees, who will now become inspectors at the plant, are not obligated to have undergone any particular training in food safety or regulatory compliance. So let's just let anybody in there. Hey, janitor guy, go ahead and do a food inspection. Well, I don't know how to do a food inspection. What am I looking for? Just remove the most obvious stuff. But the line's going super fast. I can't see anything. Good luck. That's what's going to happen, almost guaranteed. Again, increasing line speeds, they're another issue, because it makes it really difficult to spot things that aren't super obvious. Okay. Now, this regulatory change, according to Sonny Perdue, allows us to ensure food safety while eliminating outdated rules and allowing for companies to innovate. Now, he also called it, in a press release, a modernization of a 50-year-old process. How will it allow companies to innovate? That's just, it's got to be their word for, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out how to make it work with faster line speeds. Already, line speeds are at a breakneck pace. Now they're making it even faster. But don't worry, they'll innovate. No, they're going to cut corners. They're going to cut corners. He says modernization, but in reality, it's deregulation. Now, the new rule would actually remove about 40% of government food safety inspectors from pig slaughter plants, turning their tasks over to plant operators with no required training, and allow plants to aggressively increase their already breakneck line speeds to process more hogs per hour and increase profits. That's a quote from Debbie Berkowitz, director of the Worker Safety and Health Program at the National Employment Law Project and a former senior policy advisor for OSHA under the Obama administration. So she kind of knows what she's talking about, right? She adds that by removing all limits on pig slaughter line speeds in an already dangerous industry, the Trump administration is rigging the rules against our nation's packing house workers and sacrificing their health to benefit narrow corporate interests. Well, that seems about right. Now, that's not to mention that you also have the health of consumers. When these companies have lax regulations and they cut corners, people will end up getting sick. There will be contaminants, more contaminants in the food. line workers that, are overworked and have no special training will begin to miss things. Now, for the company, they'll just be like, well, yeah, this guy missed something. He's fired. Replace him, right? Well, that sucks for the worker because this worker is, again, put in a position where it's almost impossible to do their job and to do it correctly. And so the next outbreak happens. Look who's going to get fired. Look who's going to get in trouble. And look who's not going to get in trouble. And that's the people making all the money. Now, so there's that, right? And look, it's not as if I'm pulling this out of my ass, right? No, this is what used to happen when plants were unregulated. You'd be amazed at what would actually end up in your food. Like sawdust, rat droppings, things like that would end up in your meat because they didn't care, because they would make more money if they were allowed to cut more corners. So it's absolutely disgusting. It's the whole reason why we have inspections and regulators. This is not a situation where you have to wait for the invisible hand of the free market, because how many people have to get sick and die for there to be enough outrage for these companies to fix it? And by then, the damage is already done. So, and look, you never know. Maybe it's your family that's next. And if that happens, well, you're not going to be such a fan of the free market, are you? Now, thankfully, there's a lot of pushback on this rule. Okay. Now, the USDA's Office of the Inspector General has already opened a probe into whether the agency had concealed information and used flawed data on worker safety when evaluating the new hog inspection system. So now they have been working on these changing regulations for a while. But over the last, I think, 2 administrations, the Obama administration at least, I know for certain that they're like, no, let's hold back on this because we need to study if these regulations will be effective in, allowing inspectors to continue to do their job effectively. The Trump administration said, nah, we don't need science. No, we don't need facts. These companies want to speed up the lines and have less inspectors, save lots of money. Done. You know why? Because Republicans, we always side with corporations. We always side with business against the consumer. So now, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, they represent about 30,000 pork plant workers, also said this about the new rules. Quote, today, the USDA rules sends a clear message that this administration values corporate profits more than the safety of America's food and workers. Increasing pork plant line speeds is a reckless and corporate giveaway that would put thousands of workers in harm's way as they are forced to meet impossible demands. USDA said inspectors, quote, will retain the authority to stop or slow the line as necessary, but estimates that reductions in staff will save the agency about $8.7 million. So now, if you're worried about money, then why did you give $1.9 trillion in tax cuts to the rich and corporations? Again, 83% of that went to the wealthiest Americans. If you're so worried about saving $8.7 million, you should have not given away to these companies. But it's not about the money. It's about the swamp. It's about corruption. It's about these companies bribing politicians, mostly Republican politicians. Now, Winona Halter, executive director of Food and Water Watch, also pushed back. She wrote this in a statement, quote, the implementation of the rule will result in the fox guarding the hen house. With less government oversight for hog slaughter inspection, big meat companies will have the freedom to inspect themselves and push towards their goal of increasing line speeds. There's no doubt about it. Faster line speeds plus less inspection equals more food contamination. So those are the people against. I got one quote in favor, right? And this is the National Pork Producers Council. And it's the president, David Herring. Oh, this should be good, right? So the National Pork Producers Council, of course, is the industry lobbying group in favor, of the pork producer industry. They said, we applaud the USDA for introducing a new inspection system that incentivizes investment in new technologies while ensuring a safe supply of wholesome American pork. Wholesome. I love that, right? They just kind of threw that in there. Wholesome American pork, plus stuff that you probably don't want to know is in there. Yeah. There's no incentive here for them to innovate new technology. None. It's complete and utter crap, which, by the way, may or may not end up in your pork now that this rule has been approved. This is awful for both workers and consumers. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to eat bacon anymore. And I love bacon. But, like, I don't know. I don't know, man. How long until we have another disastrous outbreak from contaminated food? And my guess with these new rules, it probably won't take long. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We've got disastrous medical bills, and you won't believe this new clothing line. So, and what they decided to do. Outrageous. All right, we'll be back here in a couple of minutes. Please like and share the stream. We'll be right back. Around the nation. Welcome back to the show. Around the nation right here, TWT Nation. Jeff Walderfield with you. Quick break. I want to read one comment from member section here. This is Actus Magus, who points out we've already had outbreak after outbreak from things like lettuce and cauliflower. Time for pork to get its turn. Not just that, but they also did the same thing to chicken, and now they're looking at beef. Here we go. You can't eat anything here in this country anymore. All right. Disastrous. So, let's go to the next story. Now, recently, Senator Bernie Sanders asked people on Twitter about what was their most absurd medical bill that they had ever received. Now, Bernie Sanders, of course, is in favor of a single-payer Medicare for all healthcare system, which would eliminate copays, premiums, and deductibles for every single American. So every American guaranteed coverage. That's pretty cool, right? Especially when you look at some of these horror stories that these people had shared, and they are both amazing slash heartbreaking. So let me start out with the first response here. One user said, quote, $10,000 to pay for our daughter's neonatal care 1 year after the fact. She died 30 minutes after birth, and our insurance wouldn't pay because we failed to add her to our policy. So this person has a child who unfortunately passed away. Didn't add her to insurance. Hey, sorry, your dead baby's not covered. That'll be $10,000, please. Jesus. More. $120,000 emergency room bill came the day that I paid $8,000 for my daughter's funeral. Again, these are some of the worst stories. Now, here's the kicker about that, right? So again, $8,000 for a funeral, $120,000 medical bill. She died because she couldn't afford the medicine and treatment after she was released from the ER. And that person says, quote, "This is what access to health care gets you." And you are all these Democrats out there talking about, oh no, we just want to make sure that every American has access to health care. No, that's what access is. We already have access to health care, but it's 100% unaffordable for so many Americans. So that's why no half measures, Medicare for all. More. All right. Troy Rudd said in 1991 at age 21, I broke my neck in a diving accident. $1.2 million later for 8 months in the hospital after months of fighting with Blue Cross and Loyola University Medical Center in Chicago. I owed $250,000 after insurance. Well, I mean, could have been the $1.2 million. That's not the point. What regular person has $250,000 just lying around for medical bills? No, nobody. That's why he was forced to file medical bankruptcy at the age of 23. That is your free market in healthcare. Barbaric. Another one. Attempted to charge me $600 to remove my stitches. Did it myself in 4 minutes. Saved a lot of money. Now, there's another story of a person who fainted from the heat, right? It's hot outside, hadn't eaten all day, so obviously passed out, had an ambulance called. So the ambulance came, they had an IV, did their job, gave him fluids, everything. A few minutes, he was fine. They still decided to bring him back to the hospital and run a few tests. So after all that said and done, and by the way, nothing was wrong with him. He was fine. It's just hot outside and, not eating for most of the day. He ended up getting a $12,000 medical bill. More. Another woman got billed $3,000 a year for 3 years after her son was born because the insurance company had deemed her emergency C-section completely unnecessary. It was $9,000. And she also had to pay $3,000 up front for a miscarriage. And $500, and this is icing on the cake, for an ultrasound confirming that her child had died in the womb. So, another woman paid $35,000 for an ectopic pregnancy. She lost a baby and could have lost her life emergency surgery. And now she owes $35,000 to the hospital. A man ended up being charged $1,400 for a Band-Aid on a $40,000 bill total for the hospital. Now, here's the thing about the American healthcare system. The most simplest things are marked up to an insane price so they can maximize profit, maximize the amount of money coming in. Okay? Even nonprofit hospitals tend to mark things up in order to recoup their losses, right? And a lot of that is due to the insane price of pharmaceutical drugs, as well as these hospitals use. Okay, and the reduced amount of federal funding that these hospitals get, federal and state funding. So they charge these insane amounts, $1,400 for a Band-Aid that should have cost about 20 cents. Complete and utter insanity. Now, there's more. People who have run for office even, right? Even people on the TYT network, Farron Cousins had his own story, runs Ring of Fire, right? So he had his own story. And then here's a name if you've been watching for a long time, you might recognize. Amy Villela. Now, she ran as a Justice Democrat and shared her story. She shared her story on this show, shared her story on the Young Turks main show, and everywhere she get Humanist Report. And their stories, if you haven't heard, it's incredibly heartbreaking, right? Now, she shared this on Twitter. She said, my daughter Shaylin's $350,000 medical bill to die a needless death. Treating her and saving her life would have cost about $1,500. all because she couldn't provide a proof of insurance. I remember hearing that story. I mean, she went into detail. Medical biopsy, it's what they, or wallet biopsy, it's what they call it. If they don't think you have the money to pay, then they'll let you go, give you an aspirin, and tell you to leave. And that's exactly what they did to her. And then she died. Totally needless, unnecessary. And look, I've talked to her on and off air, and her story, again, is devastating. And her resolve in the face of that, dealing with that tragedy, is nothing short of amazing. And she's an amazing person, and her and her family. And so that's why she is a fighter. That's why she fights for Medicare for all. She doesn't want to see anything like that happen to a family again. I have my own personal story, right? Not about insurance bills, but about the fear of insurance bills. My own sister, she didn't have insurance, and she was having a heart attack, related symptoms, nausea, vomiting, and all that. The symptoms that women get when they have when they're ready to go into to basically cardiac arrest. And she's like, "Oh no, I'm fine. I'll be fine. I'm just getting sick this morning. I'm not going to go to the hospital." Why? Because I don't have insurance. It'll cost too much. She died that morning. So, all because she was afraid of how much our healthcare system was going to cost us, because it's insane. It's absolutely insane and unacceptable. There's another person that was charged $120,000 per treatment for chemotherapy for cancer. Tell me who has that kind of money. A regular person that does not have that kind of money. There's nobody. Nobody. We cannot. This is 100%, even with insurance, completely unaffordable. No one outside of America pays this kind of money for these procedures or these medications. No one. No one. One more here. And this is from a doctor who, received this kind of treatment. She said $600 for my son, who lived for about 3 minutes. He received no medical care at all, as he died almost immediately. He didn't get enrolled in my insurance plan. So I got the bill from the hospital where I was a doctor. This is barbaric. What are we doing? We are the only modern country in the entire world where people have these stories. The only country. Absolute insanity. Again, there are a lot of these people have insurance, lost their children, lost their family members, and then get a giant bill on top of it, as if you don't already have enough to worry about. You have to bury your freaking child. And then you also have to worry about, well, gee, I don't have $120,000 or $60,000 to pay for a medical bill. I don't have time to sit here and argue with my insurance company and whether or not they feel like they want to cover it. No, Medicare for all. There are literally thousands of these stories. And these are just online. This is just one thread on Twitter. There are likely so many more in this country that we have never heard of. How many more do we have to hear? How many more have to happen before we can get smart and get Medicare for all? These politicians and these pundits, they can sit there and they can lie about single payer. They're doing it right this minute. Oh, your taxes are going to go. It's going to take away your health insurance. It's not going to take away your health insurance. It's a flat out BS lie meant to scare you away. Why? Because these companies want to make profit. I believe that companies should have be able to make a profit, but not in healthcare. You know why? Because we have profit in healthcare. This is what happens. You are hurting human beings. And now these companies, for a lot of these companies, you know what? Making an extra buck is more important than caring about humanity. No, we need single payer. We need it now. Unless we change to a system, not a public option, not anything that preserves health insurance. We cannot have private health insurance because if you preserve that system, then this will continue to happen. We have to have a Medicare for all single payer system, and we cannot accept any middle ground. If we do, this stuff will continue to happen in these stories, and it will not ever stop. Get the profit motive out of healthcare. Get the insurance companies out of healthcare. We need single payer. We need it now. People are literally dying for it. Okay. All right. Am I clear? I think I'm clear. All right, one more story here. All right. A clothing provider is under fire after revealing its spring 2020 menswear, which featured, as you can see in the sidebar, the names of schools devastated by mass shootings on hoodies. Now, on this particular picture, I'm going to show it right now. You can see it says Sandy Hook on it. And what makes this even more outrageous than just having a hoodie with these schools that have all been the sites of mass shootings, you can see that it is filled with what appears to be bullet holes. Bullet hole hoodies. So that happened. So they're getting a lot of heat. Now, this is on Instagram. Commenters on Instagram called the designs, quote, disgusting, callous, and revolting. And so that's just from the users. Now, the families and survivors of these different school shootings also weighed in. Kyle Kashuv, right? Now, he's a teenage Stoneman Douglas survivor. Now, he also got himself into trouble for some previous racist statements. Let's be honest about that. He said this, quote, these designs are disgusting. I would just like to say, what the actual hell is wrong with you? Goddamn monetizing off a school shooting. That sounds like something that I'd say. Now, the Instagram account for the Vicky Soto Memorial Fund, named after a teacher who died at Sandy Hook Elementary School, also criticized this brand, which, by the way, is Beastroy. So that's what this clothing house is named, and they sell these. Now, the Vicky Soto Memorial Fund account said this, as a Sandy Hook family, what you're doing here is absolutely disgusting, hurtful, wrong, and disrespectful. You'll never know what our family went through after Vicky died protecting your students. Our pain is not to be used for your fashion. Well, again, it's not just fashion. It's the fact that they're making money off this, which is the grossest thing. And that's the problem. The founders of B Story, which I guess their brand is, oh, we're dystopian, right? So that's what we do. Oh, well, we're currently living in a dystopia, by the way. And so maybe you shouldn't try to profit off, I don't know, actual death and destruction in real life. I'm just saying. Now, they did not respond to HuffPost's request for comment, but one of them did post a statement about this on their Instagram page, and they described the inspiration behind the hoodies. They said, quote, sometimes life can be painfully ironic, like the irony of dying violently in a place you consider to be a safe, controlled environment like school. We are reminded all the time of life's fragility, shortness, and unpredictability, yet we are also reminded of its infinite potential. Well, in America, there's infinite potential to be murdered at school, apparently. And so people don't need to be making money off that reminder. Maybe one of these guys, gun industry, the NRA, and thought, hey, you know what? These guys should not be the only one who can profit off this. I've got an idea. Hold my beer. It's gross. It's gross. But unfortunately, it's good old American capitalism. All right. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Please like and share the stream if you haven't already. Please consider subscribing to the channel for more videos. Hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell twice in order to get notifications whenever we post a video or whenever we go live. Also consider becoming a channel member. Hit the join button below. Or consider becoming a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation. And you can support independent progressive media. All right, guys. Thank you. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. See you tomorrow.